And this is a collaborative, multilingual live coding platform that I've had the great pleasure of working on for the last 8 years or so, and playing with all kinds of people, both people that are working on the platform and people that are using it and playing with it for various reasons. And if we go to the About page, we learn a little bit more about those people. So I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. I'm going to set my view up to be a little bit more convivial for me. You don't have to do that step if you're following along. And I have an interface with 2 panels, and I'm going to start live coding in them, because the best way to talk about live coding is not to talk about it. It's just to do it. I have these drop-down menus, and I'm going to pick mini title, which is an estuary-specific variant of a really great, popular, influential live coding language called title cycles. And I'm going to start to use title cycles. And I'm going to make a pattern that hopefully we will hear in a second. I believe I'm making sound. Yep. Am I coming through to the room? Let's figure that out. There we go. Thanks. So there's a recorded sample. It's being played once per cycle. And the way this language works, everything in between the quotation marks is a pattern where time is divided into regular units. So if I put GTR twice, and then I click the evaluate button or I press shift enter, I'll get 2 of them per cycle. Don't hesitate to make sound out there in the audience or at home if you're following along. There is going to be like kind of a test about this later, so best way to learn is to do. It's possible to pick other samples from the same bank of samples. What we have is actually equivalent to this. And there's really 2 ways that this starts to get more fun, I think, which is to start to combine different types of patterns. That's way number 1. So we have a pattern that's triggering sound samples, and we have a pattern that is changing the transposition of them. Those 2 patterns both take the same length of time, so they always line up in the same way. If I put angle brackets, the second pattern will now take 2 cycles instead. We'll get 2 note zeros and 2 note 4s, which has a little bit of extra interest in this case, I think, because the samples themselves have a longer duration than the triggers that we're sending. And so we get to kind of experience the slightly more complicated way the texture of that sound interacts with the pattern as well. We can do math on this. So if I'm going to put that last part of the expression in brackets and add 3 to that pattern, everything moves. And that motion up 3 semitones, that's the technical description for what we just did. That was an improvised motion. Like, I just made that up right now. I'm not sure there was any right or wrong answer to that. But it's only by picking a number, as it were, and making it happen and seeing what it sounds like in the room that I get to know what that sounds like. We can make this a pattern too. if this is going to work in here, but let's add another pattern. I can't resist. Let's pattern the panning, and let's make it random. Can't tell if that's working from here on stage. I'm really close to one loudspeaker. It's mono. Okay, never mind. Imagine the things were in different places, left or right. Well, we could make the gain random, which is going to really make things kind of sparse because we were kind of at full volume already. So now we're going between nothing and full volume. So everything is kind of, the average of everything has gotten lower. Oh, I hear some guitars out there. That makes me happy. Keep that up. More of that, please. So this expression rand that I've just added is giving us random values between 0 and 1 that are a deterministic function of where we are in a metric grid, which is kind of a cool thing. I'll come back to this in a second, but I can't resist saying it now. It's kind of a cool thing because one of the consequences is that when we make music in this way with people that are distributed, let's say they're making music together from different locations, different parts of the world, if they're using the same metric grid and they have clocks that are synchronized, loosely speaking, then they're going to get the same results in different places and different times, even though everything in this platform is being rendered locally. The only thing that the server is ever doing, even when we do collaborative things in this platform as it's structured, is sharing information about the programs. All of the rendering happens locally. Okay, continuing to improvise a little bit. Maybe I thought that making the gain random would be a good idea, but maybe now I'm a little bit dissatisfied by the way that things are kind of popping in and out of existence because of how extreme an effect it is. So I will remap the range of these random values between 0 and 1 to be between 0.6 and 1. That's better. Often when people play with these things, one of their first impulses in improvisation, it's not a bad impulse, is to work with other layers. I think it comes from the fact that auditory perception itself is often capable of dividing things into many layers. So it's not surprising that when people improvise or people compose music, they want to make different layers and have different things happening at the same time. So the way that we would do that here in Estuary mini title is with stack. And we would then have a list with square brackets and quotation commas. And we could put some other pattern, like maybe this. I didn't add that. I have to make a quick detour here to the wiki for Estuary. To grab a URL of a community-hosted bank of samples. There's a bunch of these out there. There it is. I said a moment ago that one of the fun things to do is to start to combine other patterns, to pattern other musical parameters at the same time. That's one of the things. Another really fun thing to do is to start to transform the patterns in different ways. So what if every 4 cycles we had twice as many guitar triggers, but we maintained the same pattern of harmonic transposition? And we stuck all the extra guitar triggers on the right side. Well, we're in mono today, you won't hear that. Imagine it. This is a multilingual platform, so I'm going to start working with something else at the same time. Well, not at the same time, going back and forth. I'm going to work with the punctual language instead and start with something simple, kind of technical, but maybe it becomes interesting if we start to do things to it, like doing things differently in different parts of the cycle, like we were just doing with the music a second ago. To buy myself a little time, I think I need to make the music a little bit more complicated so that we don't get, too bored of just hearing the same thing over and over again. We're not actually hearing the same thing over and over again. It's randomly leaving off some of the guitar notes, but that's pretty subtle. I think a simple way to do this would just be to make the transpositions really long, so they're always changing. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Works for me. Now that I'm back in the music, I can't help but pay attention to it. What if some of these samples were reversed? But not most of them. Is that my first syntax error? Has anyone else had a syntax error yet? There we go. Yeah, there's no shame in it. And if anything, there's shame in not having a syntax error. It means you're taking it easy. What's my syntax error though? Oh yeah, perfect thing. This is what's so great about doing this for like a crowd full of many programmers. It's great. Okay, now we're getting some of those backward samples. I could listen to this texture forever. So I'm going to go back to paying attention to the imagery. And I'm going to do something that I often do if I'm just improvising totally off the cuff, like I am right now, which is to go to Wikimedia Commons and grab whatever the picture of the day is. And if I go through to the deeper URL that is CORS compliant and grab that. That. Oh, that's too dark. Doesn't really fit the mood of the music exactly, but maybe it will later on if we keep improvising. These two things will come back together. Well, I'm going to back up actually. One of the things I think it's quite fun to do with pictures is to make them kind of wiggle the way the lines are wiggling. So that might be something like this. We won't move the image at all in the X dimension, but we'll move it in the Y dimension by an amount that corresponds to where we are in the X dimension and its analysis of the audio at that time, which would look something like this. Moving up and down, but not the same amount in all places. It's fun to play with masks and geometry. In generative visuals, a lot of cool generative visual work out there. There's a tendency to do things that occupy the whole screen all the time. It's easy to do, and I sort of fell into it here today too. Right away I was kind of, already I filled up the screen with stuff. It can be a little bit overwhelming though, so it's nice to have ways of like toning things down and keeping them really small on the visual surface. This might be one way. So it fades a little bit as it goes towards the top and the bottom. You can make that fade a little bit more extreme by putting those values between 0 and 1 to the power of increasingly high numbers. If you put it to the power of 4, it concentrates a little bit more on the center of the screen. It's a little bit more abstract now. We have lost the referential information that the image had in it originally. But maybe now we can use it as a source of colors and textures, now that it's not so obviously a symbolic image. First step, I'm adding some feedback. Video feedback is fun. Stabilizes things a little bit, reminds us a little bit of analog video, maybe. It's getting a bit hard to see. I'm going to change the theme to dark so that that text pops out over the visuals a little bit more. What if our video feedback was moving? That's easy to do. Let's have it not move in the X dimension, but move only in the Y dimension. And let's have it move outwards. So that means we would be grabbing color from the previous frame at a place that's more inwards. So I could take Fy, which is the Y position, and multiply it by something less than 1 in order to grab from somewhere more inwards on the screen. Oh, I think there's a... What did I do there? And for me, this is the first time with the visual improvisation that we're doing here, where it starts to get what we had in the music a while ago. Like I drew your attention to the way that the lengths of the guitar samples overlapping slightly with each other produces an interesting effect because those times don't line up with the times of when things start. So there's a kind of emergent effect there that is interesting, where the computation is producing a result that in some sense is what I intended, but also exceeds that in ways that I can't necessarily predict. There's parts of what's happening visually now that I'm not really sure why they're happening. Like I still understand the code, at least I think I do. But I can't fully explain, for example, that kind of white banding effect that we see there. Is that some kind of artifact of, the way the limitations of the textures in OpenGL and the shader? Maybe, I don't know. Some specificity of my accelerated graphics card? Could be. Sometimes it's those kind of things. Or is it just that there's something about this image, that the interaction of that source material and image and this music that is happening to produce that? I don't know. We got to that point of not really knowing what was happening fairly quickly. And I'm quite happy to be there. Yeah. Yeah, let's try it. Let's go to yesterday's Wikimedia Commons image, maybe. There we go. It's a very long URL. Oh, we gotta go to the deeper URL. Sometimes it's hard to see my mouse. There we go. Oh, I had it. I lost it. And I'm going to maybe just show off something a little bit here while I'm here too, which is to change the crossfade time. One of the characteristic features of this language punctual is that it responds to a kind of unique dynamic of live coding. Live coding creates a situation where often you want to replace a program with a new version of a program and still have the old version around for a little while. Because it sounds kind of abrupt if you just sort of change things all of a sudden. So in punctual you can evaluate, but everything about the evaluation environment, the time that it happens, is actually part of the program. It's an important part of the specification of the program, and that interacts with these crossfade times, like the 15 at the end here. And if it's working, we should have a 15-second crossfade to that other image. Well, we still got the banding. All right. I'm going to make a nice graceful exit here. I'm going to have the video gradually fade out while the feedback stays up. And then over here on the music, I will just type out my fade out. Some of you may be thinking, shouldn't that be automated? Like, shouldn't we be automating this fade out? Yeah, I guess. But actually, I quite like doing this. These manual fade outs where I type it. It's good typing practice, for one thing. But there's also something meditative about it. Or maybe athletic. Something in between those two things. Something about our feedback algorithm is producing that banding, because even when there's no input to it anymore, it's still doing that. Okay, so I have some slides that I'm going to just whip through to give some ideas about live coding, now that hopefully we have some sense of what it is or what it could be. I'll start with this one because this is one of my favorites. Wendy He Kyung Chun on source code as fetish. She wrote back in 2015 that software as source relies on a profound logic of sorcery, a fetishism that obfuscates the vicissitudes of execution and makes our machines demonic. Further, this sorcery is the obverse rather than the opposite of the other dominant trend in new media studies, the valorization of the user as agent. A little bit further down, closely engaging software will not let us escape fictions and arrive at a true understanding of our machines, but rather make our interfaces more productively spectral. As a fetish, source code can provide surprising deviant pleasures that do not end where they should. Framed as a resource, it can help us think through the machinic and human rituals that help us imagine our technologies and their executions. And I like this quote as someone who's been doing a lot of live coding over the last 10 years, because I think that one of the things that's happening in live coding is that we are exploring a generally held fetish for source code, and that lets us kind of like turn it around and examine it and perhaps also gain some pleasure from it. I think that the way that the word fetish is being used here is kind of echoing the way the word fetish is used in classical Marxism, the fetishism of commodities, the idea that the price of something, the way that it appears on the market, conceals this larger network that actually produces and eventually consumes the thing. And so source code seems to have a similar property. People imagine it as the thing that produces the results that we receive, but, well, the real story is a little bit more complicated than that, a lot more complicated than that, as lots of people in this room know. Another thing I like to refer to sometimes, thinking about what live coding is and what it might mean, is the Top Lap Manifesto, which is a tongue-in-cheek manifesto that was made by a bunch of people, I think a little bit over a decade ago. My favorite line from the manifesto is the second one, "Show us your screens," because I feel like that practice of doing things with computers and sharing the screen with people all the time, like, if anything, is the practice that I found to be so productive about live coding. It's that. So you might actually be sharing other types of things with people, and they might not look like text source code when you're live coding, and I think that's okay. The environment you're just using, Estuary, is a multilingual environment. There's lots of different programming languages that might be available there. On one level, my interest in this kind of thing is motivated by just like the very everyday practical realization that if you're improvising with people, which is something that I'm really fond of and I think is a really important and productive practice, being able to have different quote unquote tools in the toolbox for different people and different moments maybe helps other people find a way into things. But at a more profound level, it's also about a discomfort with the tendency of programming languages and technologies to be understood, even if only provisionally and locally, as one true languages. People commit to them and invest in them in, let's say, monogamous ways, at least for a period of time. And for a long time, I've been interested in the complexities, sometimes hidden complexities of our relationship to language. And I take inspiration from, among other places, this minor monograph of Derrida's, The Monolingualism of the Other, which is a reflection on the complexities of his relationship to the French language. It's a meditation on this phrase, the beginning of the monograph, "I only have one language, it is not mine." He continues, these are little excerpts from the first few pages. "The monolingualism in which I draw my very breath is for me my element, not a natural element, not the transparency of the ether, but an absolute habitat." So kind of referring to a kind of Sapir-Whorf hypothesis here, language as the horizon that contains us and lets us think about what is possible. But then he continues in almost the next breath, "Yet it will never be mine, this language, the only one I am thus destined to speak, as long as speech is possible for me in life and death. You see, never will this language be mine, and truth to tell, it never was." And the book starts to unpack these things in more detail, like all of the ways that the French language, for various reasons, universal and personal, is not really available to him. "I am wrong to speak of a crossing in a place, for it is on the shores of the French language, uniquely and neither inside nor outside it, on the unplaceable line of its coast, that since forever and lastingly, I wonder if one can love, enjoy oneself, pray, die from pain, or just die, plain and simple, in another language, or without telling anyone about it, without even speaking at all." And what I really like here is this image of being on the shore of a language, because that's been my experience over the past however many years, practicing multilingual live coding and also doing all of the development that goes into this. Never really being committed to any of these tools, but kind of like drifting on the tides and drifting in between different shores of different languages. It's an interesting place to be, and I think maybe it is not going too far to speculate that it is a place, this place of being open to languages that are closed to us, or languages that maybe are more, do more to serve others than to serve the self, could be an important part of having more people involved with whatever the possible futures of computing are. And making a little bit of a jump, I think that is, that's one of my interests in live coding. I think that's one of the ways I would connect it to, synthetically, some of the themes of the other speakers at the conference here. Like I think live coding, if nothing else, and I think it can be other things, but if nothing else, it can be a place where people brush up physically, bodily, sensorily against computing things and start to become comfortable with them and start to derive, as Chun says, deviant pleasures from them. And I think we need that, as well as all of the brilliant ideas that we might have about what can be done with these technologies. I've learned a lot over the years from working with a group at McMaster called the Cybernetic Orchestra. We meet almost weekly to do live coding together, and I won't play any of that now. But the S3 platform that I just showed you is well suited to doing such things together with other people, and it's just such a great practice. Debated about whether to play this or not, but I will. So this is an excerpt of a solo live coding piece that I did originally back in 2014, and I did various performances of it between 2014 and 2017. I haven't done it much recently, but I still think of it as a piece that is alive that I will go back to. A piece called Demon. I wanted to be able to play guitar and live code at the same time. You can't really do that. I don't have enough arms for that, but perhaps an agent could do that. And there's a number of these pieces out there, like live coding where an agent does the live coding. The agent, in this case, the original version of it was quite crude. It still is quite crude. It's basically walking through combinatorial sets of possibilities that I thought might be interesting, making choices in some cases very arbitrarily or random about them, and then being forced to type it out so as thus to share what it's doing with me, who is watching it and also listening to it. Because it's forced to type it out, of course, I can also change the code later on, and usually that's how performances of this went, at least at first, that I would play guitar in the beginning while it would do the live coding. You know, we would have that kind of interaction, and at a certain point, to take it apart, which was more complicated, I would put the agent to sleep and do the rest myself. This was at an algo rave, which is a characteristic event, a type of event, loosely associated but not exclusively with the live coding community, where people have a club night, dancing and that kind of thing, but a lot of the music is live coded or otherwise algorithmically generated. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Super crude. Like, I would hesitate to call this artificial intelligence. If anyone goes and looks up the old code repositories of it, like, do not expect sophisticated, artificial intelligence algorithms there. You won't find them. Later versions did have some simple machine listening, and who knows, maybe I will inject a little bit more sophistication into it the next time I get to go back to it. However, as I think about this piece now, I've been thinking about the echoes or connections of it with a deservedly much more famous piece of agential music, of artificial intelligence music, George E. Lewis's piece Voyager, which was an improvising agent that would make musical choices on stage and was used by Voyager sometimes just with himself playing along on trombone, sometimes with other people, members of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Music, free jazz musicians, basic jazz and free jazz musicians, basically, that would play along with this piece as it evolved over periods of decades. And Lewis has written in interesting ways about this piece. So the connection with the piece I just showed you is that, like Lewis's piece, I'm starting to think about the possibility of, as an artist, having this agent piece that I develop over a long time, not necessarily for anyone in the world to use, but maybe for the people who I already have musical relationships with to use, and for myself to use. And so it's interesting to read what Lewis wrote about this piece, because I think it connects in interesting ways to our present AI panic. Writing in the year 2000, Lewis writes, "For me, what Jerry Garcia called the anti-authoritarian impulse in improvisation led me to pursue the project of de-instrumentalizing the computer. The system is designed to avoid the kind of uniformity where the same kind of input routinely leads to the same result. Voyager's aesthetic of variation and difference is at variance with the information retrieval and control paradigm that late capitalism has found useful in framing its preferred approach to the encounter with computer technology. Interactivity has gradually become a metonym for information retrieval rather than dialogue." And so the aim is to make a piece then. I think that the implicit aim of Voyager is to make a piece that's about dialogue. And I see that as the aim of Daemon as well, even to whatever extent it engages with artificial intelligence techniques. And I think maybe that's also something that comes out of the practice of improvising with computers, is this interest in more generally reconceiving the role of computing technologies as not only or primarily being about information retrieval, which is so often how things are cast, but as tools for dialogue, that is to say, tools for exploring our relationships with each other and with the physical world and things like this. So I think maybe now is the moment to quickly do a roulette. Sorry, we don't have time for that last thing I was going to do. So I changed my mind. I'm going to show you one other thing that we do with Estuary, and then I'll take a quick question or two. So one of the things that is kind of fun to explore with Estuary and with collaborative live coding is making your own languages. And that the form that this has taken in the last year or two, beyond sort of deep, complicated languages like punctual or tidal, is what we're calling JSOlangs, which is a portmanteau on esolang, or esoteric programming languages that are meant to explore some kind of artistic concept, or maybe they're intended simply as conceptual art pieces in their own right. And JSOlangs in Estuary are simply little pieces of JavaScript that define new languages, and then you can use them right away. So this is an example of a JSOlang that I call Drone 0, and it's just a simple language that lets us take advantage of the fact that punctual produces both sound and visuals to make a language that produces sound and visuals with an even more reduced syntax. Oh, forgot a 0. So this is the language where the only element of the syntax is numbers, and the numbers make up chords in MIDI note numbers, which is a well-known standard. And so I can start to improvise with it really fluidly. The visuals are generative, but also predefined, I guess, as a particular aspect of this language's aesthetic. So yeah, those are some of the things that I'm doing. Multilingual live coding, often with other people, sometimes with agents. And it's a lot of fun. If I could leave you with one thought, it's if there's any way that you can fit improvisation with live coding into your life or into the life of people around you, come and join us, because there's like lots of people doing this stuff around the world. And there's lots of online communities and lots of ways of getting involved. So it'd be great to see some of you or hear some of you in those spaces. And I think I've got time for a couple questions.
So are you going to VJ the party tonight?
Sorry, could you say the question again?
Are you going to be the VJ for the party tonight?
I am doing a little performance at the party tonight.
Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, looking forward to it. I'll try to be. It's a party, so today it was like really meditative for some reason. So maybe I've got that out of my system now, and I can hopefully bring the party at night instead.
Have you tried using LLMs with this kind of work, like ChatGPT kind of stuff?
Not so far, and I feel like I'd have to think really carefully about how I want to do that, because you're like I know the topic's going to come up, like it's on everyone's minds, right? A lot of people have referred to it over the last few days. The thing that I think bugs me about the LLM hype right now is the way it taps into that thing that George Lewis critiqued, like the culture of information retrieval in computing. Like here is another system even more impressive where it's like, it's going to give people the answers. They don't need to do it themselves anymore, or, because we have a system that's going to give people the answers. So I feel like that when I do engage with those things, just like in the earlier and crude aspects of the daemon piece, it'll be trying to find some way of like engaging with it, but really, really not asking it to give me the right answers, and just like disengaging from that whole paradigm of using computers as devices to tell us what to do in order to get by and pass and conform. That is just so all over the place and crushing, but also resistible. Thanks for the question.
Cool. Anyone else? Oh.
I guess I'm wondering about techniques for like teaching or like engaging like the community in live coding. I think like I've tried getting into it with friends, and I found it super fun, but I feel like, yeah, it's just like an interesting thing to learn for someone without a coding background, because they've got to pick up the language and the music aspect of it. So I'm just curious, like, what that experience has been like, if there have been people who joined like the cybernetic orchestra without programming experience.
Yeah, thanks for that great question, which is really close to my heart. I don't know if this is going to answer it directly. I mean, I think different people have all kinds of different experiences with these things, but I think for me, like we don't have enough languages. We don't have enough diversity of computational interfaces out there, and not just in live coding, but in general, actually. And so that can be a really oppressive thing, right? Like, and then there's another oppressive thing on top of it, which is like how many people like coding computation, how much is there this general social discourse out there about it as this thing that you have to do or else you will be obsolete, like learn to code or else, it's as a kind of like gun that is held to the collective head. Those are really distorting factors, I think, that come into when people are learning about computing or when people are live coding. So I think being able to create situations that are playful with languages and notations and interfaces that are as easy to use as possible helps a lot. Having like just jam sessions, there's a bunch of those that people organize online, are great. And just like encouraging people to have fun with it. And maybe, I guess, jumping back to my point from a few seconds ago, maybe not trying not to think of live coding as something that's going to teach people Python or teach people how to be machine listening engineers or whatever, but rather simply as a way of exploring improvisation and art in the world that we live in, which for better or worse is littered with computational devices. Like I'm gravitating more and more to thinking of it that way, and like not, and you know, kind of like finding ways of subtly pushing back on the "you should do this because it's good for you" narrative that is too easily out there about anything to do with code. But I have so many other thoughts about this, so we could chat about it later too. Like that's one of my favorite questions.
Cool. Thank you, David. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.